Now, the third option for vaccine design does not include whole cells, but includes parts from the pathogen itself. These microbe parts are your antigens, or molecules from the pathogen. They are only made if the exact antigen is known. Most viruses or cells have thousands to hundreds of thousands of different molecules. And so trying to figure out which molecule of those thousands or hundreds of thousands are the molecules that the body responds to using the immune system can be quite difficult. And so these types of vaccines can require a lot of research and time and money. But once discovered, these types of vaccines are fantastic. Some examples of these are the hepatitis B vaccine, the HPV vaccine, the shingles vaccine, and then also the DTaP or Tdap, which is for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. These vaccines, since they are pure molecules, don't require special storage. They also don't require boosters generally because they contain purified versions of the antigen. So you can inject individuals with high concentrations of that antigen. Finally, we have this fourth category of vaccine design, which is not currently in production, but are some possibilities for the future. These are sort of genetically engineered or biotech vaccines. You might have heard of some of these. So one example of this is inserting polio vaccine into bananas. By genetically engineering them into bananas, you could then just provide a child with a banana at the hospital, watch the child eat the banana, and then send the child on his or her way. And in this case, the child would not only get vaccinated, but also get a banana, which can be nutritious and healthy, and is a much better option than injecting children, not only because of the pain component, but primarily because in many areas of the world, getting access to sterile needles can be a challenge. And vaccines have in the past resulted in transmission of disease because sterile needles were not available. And so used needles were used to vaccinate individuals, transmitting disease as a result. However, these types of vaccines in food items do not seem to be effective enough to generate an immune response, and so they're still in production and research. A second type of biotech vaccine is what's called the Trojan horse vaccine. If you remember the story of the Trojan horse, the Trojans were attacking a Greek city and were finding it difficult to attack since the walls were so high for the Greek city. So what the Trojans eventually did was they built a wooden horse and pretended that it was a gift for the Greeks. And the Greeks opened up their city walls, bringing the Trojan horse inside. Unbeknownst to the Greeks, the Trojans were hiding inside the horse and at night snuck out and killed the population. The reason why this Trojan horse name is used is because the way these vaccines would work is they would end up having a non-pathogenic microbe, often like yeast or E. coli, which is non-pathogenic generally, and have them contain a gene from a pathogen. And so in this case here, you see a hepatitis B virus would have a gene inserted into a yeast cell. That yeast cell then produces the antigens from the hepatitis B. So you then inject individuals with this yeast cell that's producing these hepatitis B molecules. These vaccines are not considered quite as effective as researchers would like, and so again, they're not being used today, but they're a possibility for use in the future. Finally, we have a last type of biotech vaccines, and these are referred to as DNA vaccines. A DNA vaccine would be similar to a Trojan horse, but skipping this last step. So what would happen in a DNA vaccine is a pathogen would have a gene for an antigen identified, and that gene would be inserted directly into a vaccine. So you would be vaccinated with DNA molecules and not the antigen directly. Again, this is promising because it's very easy to manufacture DNA, and DNA is highly stable, so it wouldn't require any special storage, but it doesn't work as effectively as a typical vaccine. And so these are not being used in humans just yet. Now, most vaccines, when they are administered, are injected, as I'm sure you know. It would be so much easier if we could just provide people with pills. There are a few other vaccines that aren't injected, like the nasal spray flu vaccine or the oral polio vaccine that's given as drops. But most vaccines remain injected. And so why is that? The reason is that if you take in any vaccines through any other means, it could be changed or altered physically before it makes contact with your immune system. Remember, the important key is that all of the antigens, all these molecules that the pathogens make, need to stay and keep their shape so that they can help train your immune system to recognize those molecules later so that your immune system can fight the pathogen later. If these antigens are altered by, say, your digestive system because you've swallowed the vaccine, then your immune system wouldn't be able to recognize those molecules later. That's why most vaccines are injected, so they can make direct contact with your immune system. Now, what else is included in vaccines in addition to these different ingredients that we've listed here? Vaccines often will contain some other items. One of these could be adjuvants. An adjuvant is a compound that enhances the immunogenicity, or how much of an immune response you get from the antigen itself. It prolongs the retention of the antigen in the body so the antigen isn't eliminated quickly, allowing the immune system to learn from that antigen over a longer period of time. That makes your immune system stronger in order to recognize that antigen later. There are other types of vaccines that also contain preservatives. Some preservatives include salts or other molecules. And these are essentially to keep the molecular structure of the molecules in the vaccine intact, again, to make sure that your vaccine acts effectively once inside the body. Now, there are some side effects of vaccines, and these are well-known side effects that people do get from vaccines, and it is important to recognize that all vaccines have some sort of side effect. Common side effects include things such as reactions at the infection site, so redness, swelling, and pain. And this would happen if you were injected with anything, or even if a sterile needle were to poke you. You would have redness, swelling, and pain. It's not specific to the vaccine itself. Vaccines can also result in fever or fatigue. And this is a common feature, and some people feel like the vaccine made them sick, when really, it's the body is responding with fever and fatigue. And this is an expected consequence when your immune system is fighting off what it thinks is an infection. It's an immune response and not the disease being caused by the vaccine itself. Finally, every vaccine has some possibility of forming an allergy. Sometimes the possibility is 1 in 10 million, but some vaccines can result in allergies in some individuals. And so it is important to recognize that because of these common side effects, the CDC only recommends individuals get vaccines when they expect to be encountering those pathogens in their lifetime. Again, for instance, in the cases of smallpox or polio, people in the United States are no longer vaccinated against these diseases because we're not expected to encounter them in our lifetime. They've been eradicated from the US. Of course, there are less common side effects that happen to 1 in 10 million or 1 in 100 million individuals. And it's important to recognize that these less common side effects can happen, but that they are so rare as to be almost unimportant in comparison to the possibility of actually getting the disease itself. The first one of these that I want to talk about is panencephalitis. Panencephalitis is a result of the MMR vaccine. This is specifically from the measles portion of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. Panencephalitis is when that measles vaccine, which is an attenuated version, ends up clustering in the brain and creating holes and brain damage. There are a couple dozen people in the United States that have developed panencephalitis from MMR. The CDC and other researchers do not understand why these individuals developed panencephalitis and no one else did. And again, the important thing to realize is that this is out of roughly 300 million vaccinated individuals. We have a couple of dozen people that have developed this. The chances of getting debilitative side effects from actually acquiring measles is much higher than the chances of developing panencephalitis from the MMR vaccine itself. Another side effect that has been observed is a reverse mutation with an attenuated vaccine. This was observed with the polio vaccine. Remember that the oral polio vaccine is an attenuated version, which means that it's weakened. And as we mentioned, sometimes these attenuated versions are formed by mutation. Now, just like mutations can form to make pathogens weaker, sometimes these mutations can occur in reverse, making the pathogen strong again and giving the pathogen the ability to cause disease. That's what happened with one strain of the oral polio vaccine in Africa a few decades ago. What ended up happening was in one batch, totally accidentally, the polio vaccine ended up mutating back to its pathogenic state. What ended up happening then was a few villages ended up getting infected with the polio virus itself by doctors and the World Health Organization. This was highly unfortunate and really negative consequence of the vaccination process. And after realizing what happened, the World Health Organization and polio vaccine companies have made special measures to ensure that this will not happen again. Finally, there's always the possibility that contamination could occur with pathogens or a dangerous chemical in the process of producing vaccines. We haven't seen this happen yet, but it is a possibility that could happen in the future. So something to always sort of recognize. We're going to continue to talk about side effects and some consequences of that next.